Hi there and welcome to another Saturday revision session. Today we're going to have a look at principles of training, recovery, periodization and psychological preparation. So our learning intentions today are to become aware of the principles of training, acknowledge the importance of recovery and how to best recover from training. We're going to have a look at strategies to avoid the symptoms of overtraining, so OTS or so overtraining syndrome. Demonstrate an understanding of periodization in the design of training programs. Discuss ways that confidence, anxiety, motivation, concentration and feedback impact on practice and performance. Strategies to enhance confidence, motivation and concentration. Discuss different types of feedback an athlete can use, and then analyze strategies to improve mental preparedness for before, during and after an activity, and developing a psychological preparation routine. Okay, so the acronym SPORT here, S-P-O-R-T, relates to the principles of training. So any training session or block or a training block needs to bear in mind SPORT. So S stands for specificity. So the training that the athlete undertakes must be specific to their sport or to their fitness goals. So there wouldn't be much point in a rower spending a lot of time out running and not doing their cardio sessions on the water and skill sessions on the water. So the session would need to be specific towards the goals. Then we have progressive overload. So that relates to our P and O. And progressive overload involves stressing the body beyond its usual physiological levels. This should be done on a gradual basis. So usually workload is increased by 5 to 10% per week only. So ways that an athlete can progressively overload are to increase the length of the session, increase the intensity of the session, increase the amount of reps or sets. You could have decreased recovery time. You could vary the training or cross training, select different training methods. You can work to different thresholds, heart rate thresholds. You can increase that. But generally, the rule of thumb would be that the workload is increased by only 5 to 10% per week only. Okay, that allows the body to undergo sufficient stress and to make the necessary adaptations as a response to training, and that's quite important. If the overload is too much, well then the athlete is at risk of overtraining, and we'll have a look at overtraining a little later in the video. So next is reversibility. So reversibility refers to any adaptation that occurs as a result of training will be reversed as a result of training stopping. So one reason why training might stop would be maybe an injury or a lack of motivation or boredom setting in. But reversibility means that an athlete's gains that they get from training will actually start to reverse and go backwards. So taking, for example, an athlete who is a distance runner, well, their endurance will actually drop off when they haven't been training. Now it is important to note that a highly trained athlete after training stopping, if they get injured, can get back to their previous level quicker than someone who has never been to that level of fitness before and is working towards that. Okay, the next principle of training is tedium. Okay, so if anything is ever described as being tedious, that means it's quite a lot of work. It's not really that exciting. It could be very boring. So tedium refers to how an athlete can become bored of their training routine. This can come from a repetitive schedule, so the same training sessions over and over again, lack of enjoyment, and lack of variety or challenge. So even sometimes things can get too easy and the athlete can lack in motivation at the really high level. So in addition to our SPORT, an awareness of overtraining and recovery must be factored into training plans also. So the whole principle of training sport needs to be kind of considered by a coach or the athlete or both when they're designing a plan. But overtraining and recovery are important to remember as well. Okay, some questions then based on what we just looked at. So define 3 principles of training that could be used by coaches when designing training plans to enhance athletes' fitness levels. So here we could be talking about specificity, we could be talking about progressive overload, reversibility, and tedium. So define would be just name and explain there what specificity, progressive overload, reversibility, and tedium is. And then maybe just provide a short little example of how a coach might consider one of or each of those three when they're designing a training plan to enhance an athlete's fitness level. So you can use a sport in your example, or you can keep it general and just talk about what a coach needs to consider. So a little sneaky question here, part 2 at the bottom. So we have name another principle of training and outline its importance in the design of effective fitness training plans. So this question is a really good example of when you go into your exam, it's so important to read through the full exam paper for maybe 10 minutes at the start of the exam, because you could very easily just start into this question. You could start into your A and B and start writing at B part 1, and then all of a sudden it says name another principle of training, and if you can't think of it on the day, well then you're stuck. You kind of have to keep going with that question. So maybe another question on the paper, you have plenty of option, would suit you a little bit better. Okay, so let's say for example we've talked about specificity, we've talked about progressive overload, and we've talked about reversibility. So there's our 1, 2, 3. That answers our 3 principles of training, but we do have to have another one there. So you would have to talk about a tedium there in that case. So looking at recovery next. So recovery is essential in performing at optimal level, and I think we all would know that. So physical training is quite strenuous and can leave an athlete sore and mentally fatigued. Some common recovery methods are sleep, so usually about 6 to 8 hours per night is probably acceptable, but for high level really you'd be looking at 8 to 10. Hydration, nutrition, compression garments, cold therapy, light aerobic activity, and rest days. Light aerobic activity relates to active recovery there. So out of these, it is really important to know some recovery methods, and also explain why. So why is sleep important? What does that allow the body to do to recover? Why is hydration important? Nutrition, compression garments, cold therapy, light aerobic activity, and rest days. What do they actually do in the body that allows the body to recover? So looking at compression garments first of all. So you might have seen these. They could be in the shape of boots, or even leggings or things like that. So they can allow the body's muscles to drain away lactic acid buildup during exercise. So because we have that compression, the lactic acid is a waste product as a result of exercise that can build up in our muscles. But because we have compression garments on, squeezing our muscles, that lactic acid can drain away and allow that to clear away from the athlete's muscles, and to kind of swiffen up the return to activity. Cold therapy is the next thing. So exposure to ice baths or cold water followed by warmth can allow the muscles to recover by clearing lactic acid away from the muscles. So here's our first 2, getting rid of our lactic acid. So to expand on that a little bit, so the ice baths or cold water, what they do is allow the muscles to contract. If you've ever tried them, your muscles will kind of squeeze and shorten and tighten, and that is quite similar to if you're wringing out a towel, a wet towel. So if you squeeze the wet towel, the liquid will come out of it. The same story happens with our muscles. So the cold temperature allows our muscles to kind of get smaller and squeeze in, followed by warmth, which allows the muscles to expand. So we have kind of a draining procedure going on there really. So the cold and the heat allows the lactic acid to clear away. So that's important to know. Next is light aerobic exercise or active recovery. So this allows stiff muscle tissue to be loosened out in a non-vigorous way. So going for a walk, going for really light cycle on flat ground will just get the muscles moving again and get them loosened out and not to be too stiff. Rest days are really important in recovery and need to be factored into a training plan. So a rest day allows the athlete to do what they'd like to do on their day off and gives a body a physical and mental break. Okay, that's important to note from exercise, and it can help to avoid overtraining syndrome, so OTS. So we'll look at that later. Okay, so our overtraining syndrome, or OTS. So if an athlete is not able to rest or recover in their training plan, they are very likely to suffer from the signs of OTS, overtraining syndrome. Okay, so what might happen then is the athlete might suffer from a decreased performance, increased perceived effort. So maybe a training session in the past that might have been 6 out of 10 on the rate of perceived exertion might all of a sudden feel like an 8 out of 10, even though it could be the same session. We have excessive fatigue. So the athlete's really tired. Insomnia, they can't sleep. We have loss of appetite, might also occur there. We have increase in injuries, increase in stress and irritability. So getting quite annoyed by very small minor issues could be a sign of OTS. So some other signs and symptoms of overtraining. We have mood swings, elevated morning resting heart rate, struggling with training and performance, loss of appetite, muscle soreness, lack of focus, frequent colds and infections, persistent fatigue and sleep issues. So one question here based on what we just looked at from a recent Leaving Cert PE exam. So we have described 3 post-exercise recovery strategies that an athlete could use which would not put them at risk of committing an Irish anti-doping rule violation. Okay, so you're not permitted to use nutritional strategies as one of your answers here as well. Okay, and you would be surprised at the amount of students that would not read the full question and start talking about nutrition and carbs and protein as importance in their recovery. So here you'd be talking about your compression garments. So you'd be talking there about how the compression garments allow the athlete to drain away lactic acid from the muscles as they're exercising. You could be talking then about ice baths or cold and hot therapy, what they actually do in detail, because it does say describe. Your last one then, well, you have lots and lots of different choice. A really nice one to talk about is just very simple rest days. So allow the athlete to have a mental and physical break to allow the adaptations from training to take place. Also allow them to do what they'd like to do on their day off. So go for a walk, meet friends, go for a coffee, get some lunch, go to the shops, so on. So that allows the athlete to mentally de-stress from the rigors of training. So moving on to periodization then. So periodization is the division of a training year. So macro cycle. So macro means big. So macro is the full training year. So the division of the training year or macro cycle into smaller, more manageable intervals, mesocycle and microcycle, with the goal of managing all aspects of training to bring an athlete to peak performance for their most important competitions. And these competitions might occur once a year, once every 4 years for the Olympics, twice a year for World Championships and maybe Olympics. So each year is going to be quite different and allow the athlete to peak to get their optimum performance for the big competitions. So definitions that you need here are these 3. So macro cycle, the whole season of training and competing. So some seasons like the English Premier League might start in September or August and finish then in late May into June. Others could be from January to December. Okay, so it's the whole season of training and competing. A mesocycle is a training block with a particular focus within the season. Now, this usually could last between 4 to 6 to even 8 weeks with a particular focus. So that mesocycle could maybe even be something like a strength and conditioning focus. It could be a technique focus. It could be psychological preparation focus. But again, it lasts maybe up until a couple of months in length. Finally, micro. So micro means small. So a weekly training plan. So this is just what an athlete would do between Monday and Sunday. Details of the sessions that they do, when they do it in the week. That's their microcycle. So periodization can prevent burnout, boredom, and injuries. It ensures a balanced approach to training and can help in adding variety. Okay, so here we can see macro being the big circle on the outside, mesocycle is in the middle there, and then we have microcycle quite small here. So here's an example of an American football yearly plan. You can see at the top we have the season starts in January, ends in December. You can see when the off season it takes place. So January to the middle of March is the off season there. Then we go into in season. We have a training camp here. You can see we have specific focuses here where they're working on alactic and aerobic capacity. Then we're working on aerobic capacity. So you can see that these, I'm just going to circle this, the alactic power, that would be a mesocycle in the middle of an overall macrocycle. So here we have a general kind of a mesocycle. Within that we have a little bit of a focus, and then each week, so let's draw a line down from April. So each week then we'd have a specific microcycle, which is our weekly training plan. Okay, so that's a general example of what a periodization plan would look like. Why they do this is so that they can peak at certain times in the year to avoid injuries as well, to spice up the training and keep a good bit of variety as well. So it's really good for the athlete. Okay, so here we have a question from a recent Leaving Cert PE paper based on what we just looked at there. So with reference to a named physical activity, now when you see this, the first thing you should do in your answer should be in soccer, or in rowing, in gymnastics, in dance, in whatever sport you'd like or activity, but you need to name it. Sometimes they will have physical activity actually written in the space where you're to write your answer, and then you can just write it beside it, but very often you have to name it, and make sure you do name it. Describe 2 phases of a macrocycle within a periodized training plan. Okay, so we're talking about macrocycle. So you can be talking here about your mesocycle, you could be talking about your microcycle, you could even talk about within that, so a general preparation phase, you have your training phase, you have rest and recovery phase. So a little bit of reading around this I would recommend, because it does say describe. So have a little look over what a meso and microcycle in your chosen physical activity involves, and maybe even some phases that are involved in there. I gave you the American football example of macrocycle, but maybe go and research a macrocycle for a sport or activity of your choice, so you can answer that question. Okay, so that is a really good one to practice when you're looking at periodization. Okay, so some key definitions then. So we have self-efficacy is a specific type of self-confidence that relates to a person's perceived ability in relation to a task, situation, or activity. So perceived ability. So does the person have the confidence as well as the competence, the actual skills needed to perform in any task? And that summarizes your self-efficacy. So do you have the confidence, and do you have the skills or competence to perform? So Albert Bandura, famous psychologist, talks a lot about self-efficacy. So anxiety then can be described as psychological and physical feelings that can be brought about by a perceived threat or apprehension. So psychological anxiety can often be described as cognitive. So cognitive anxiety. So this would be someone thinking, oh gosh, I'm very nervous, I have a final coming up. What would happen if this happens? What would happen if that happens? What's the opposition going to be like? So constantly thinking about it in a psychological way that would be described as anxious. Physical then, anxiety can be described as somatic, or another word for it would be somatic. So actually physically feeling sick, maybe feeling butterflies in the stomach. So that's our anxiety there. So like I said there, we have various different types of anxiety. So let's look at state anxiety first of all. So it's a temporary reaction or state. So if anyone ever describes someone else as being in a state, so it's quite temporary. So an athlete can perceive a threat which may lead to cognitive anxiety, being worried or nervous, or somatic anxiety, getting butterflies or sweating. Okay, so that's state. So it's quite temporary. Might be in the lead up into an important match or a certain event that's coming up, but it's kind of two different strands, your cognitive and your somatic. Trait anxiety though, so this form of anxiety is more constant than state anxiety. So a trait would be known as your characteristic, so this would be more permanent. This is like someone naturally being a nervous individual. So trait anxiety relates to somebody's disposition or personal traits. They may suffer from anxiety in a number of different situations. So not only sport, it could be general life events. The person could be quite nervous about. So Bandura's model of self-efficacy. So I mentioned him a little earlier on. So self-efficacy, again, is a person's perceived ability to perform certain tasks in various different situations. Do they have confidence in their own competence to perform? And it is based on four things. Your self-efficacy is based on those four things. So the first one is past performance. So if an athlete has done something before and executed skills before, well, that can actually influence positively or negatively, if they haven't done it, their self-efficacy. Okay, and it is good practice for an athlete to think about these things in the lead up to an event and convince themselves that they can do it again because they've done it before. So past performances. Okay, the next one is number 2 is verbal persuasion. So this can come from within. So the athlete can have positive self-talk, make the use of mantras. They can also receive this verbal persuasion from their coach, their crowd, their family in the stand. That can kind of spur the athlete on, give them more confidence and belief. Very often in sport you'll see the crowd having a role in a sporting event and encouraging their athletes on. Vicarious experience is number 3. So this relates to other performers going maybe before you or seeing other performers ahead of you that could be quite similar in standard to you. Sometimes that can negatively affect people. So, also it can positively affect others, but it definitely has an influence. So vicarious experience relates to seeing someone doing something ahead of you, maybe in gymnastics, someone on a pommel horse successfully completing a routine right before you, and then you have to go up after and perform. So that can affect people in different ways. Finally, we have number 4, physiological or emotional states. Is the person nervous at the time? How are their body rhythms matching up with it? Are they sweating? Are they emotional? Is there other things on their mind here? So that's relates to number 4 there, and those 4 all relate to self-efficacy. So past performances, we have in sports psychology, athletes are encouraged to remind themselves of previous successful performances. This will lead to an increase in confidence, and that's the key to performing, being confident. Verbal persuasion, this includes things like positive self-talk as well as praise from the coach. So verbal persuasion. Vicarious persuasion, relating to a person who may lose confidence in their own ability after watching others of similar ability performing well. So again, the example of a pommel horse athlete in an event with similar high standard performers. If someone goes ahead of you and does really well and you watch it, then getting onto the pommel horse can be quite tricky for you and maybe affect your own performance. Physiological and emotional states then. So we have an athlete's heart and or breathing rate may become raised before competition. Additionally, some athletes may feel butterflies in their stomach. Some athletes will recognize the above as excitement. Others will feel nervous in these situations. Okay, so this question was from a Leaving Cert paper recently, and we have what is the difference between state anxiety and trait anxiety? Okay, so again, here you would have state being quite temporary. It can lead to cognitive anxiety of thinking about how nervous you are, thinking about scenarios in the game. It also could be somatic anxiety, where the athlete actually feels sick, maybe sweats, maybe feels butterflies in their stomach. Quite temporary state there. A trait anxiety relates to someone who is consistently nervous throughout a variety of different situations in their life. They just have a nervous disposition, and it's one of their characteristics, and it's a more permanent trait or characteristic. Okay, down below we have described how state anxiety can have an impact on performance in sport. Okay, so state anxiety. Okay, so how by thinking negatively and having some cognitive anxiety can that impact performance? How can somatic anxiety, so butterflies, sweating, elevated heart rate, lead to an impact on performance? So that would be up to you to have a little think about and answer on the day, but you do need to describe it as best as possible. So we're going to have a look at the theory of arousal now. So it's a state of alertness both physically and mentally. So the inverted U theory was developed by Yerkes and Dodson that relate to optimal levels of arousal to perform optimally. So generally it can be on a scale like this, where we have a one end of the scale being asleep and the other end of the scale being so excited about something. So the inverted U theory relates to arousal. So here we have performance. So obviously we're looking for high performance in sport. On the bottom, on the horizontal axis, we have the arousal level. Okay, so here we can see the higher the arousal level goes, we're then at risk of going into over arousal. So let's say we have maximal arousal, someone is really hyped up, but then that's going to lead to low performance. Okay. On the other hand, if we have medium level of arousal, so we come up here like so, and we draw across, well, a medium level of arousal would lead to high performance. So what is a medium level of arousal? So this would be someone who is naturally quite nervous but confident in their performance before they head out. They know what's at stake, but they're just focused on their jobs. They're focused on their performance, and not getting too wound up and quite anxious and nervous and moving a lot around the change room and maybe overthinking about the game, so on and so forth. So in sports psychology, we're looking for a medium level of arousal for a high level of performance, and this is summarized by the inverted U theory. The catastrophe theory is also another type of theory that can explain or help to explain maybe why someone has completely choked or bottled is another word that's thrown out there, a performance. So here we have performance on the bottom and we have arousal on the left here. So if we get towards a really high level of arousal, someone is getting really hyped up, they're very alert, very nearly fidgety and nervous, well, all of a sudden, if that goes too high, so it's building, gets too high, then we can have a huge drop off in performance then all of a sudden. Okay, so this might explain how really high level athletes on the biggest scale might just completely not perform and fall way below their usual standards. Okay, and that is our catastrophe theory. Motivation then next. So motivation can be described as the determination and enthusiasm to carry out a task to the best of one's ability. It can be split into two parts. So we have intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation can be described as your inner drive to perform tasks. It is you that decides to perform a task. Example, go for a run or go to the gym. So this can also be influenced by yourself too, by using your positive self-talk, by self-motivating, by looking at previous past performances, by rereading goals. That can give you a little bit of help with your intrinsic motivation. Okay, and you want to do it for yourself and you're very much single-minded and you don't need anyone to tell you, come on, keep going, keep it up. You're already motivated enough yourself. Extrinsic motivation though, So usually comes from others. So coaches, teammates, and even spectators can have a positive impact on the athlete during competition. They also could have a negative impact if it's not done well. Okay, so that is also important to factor in. So our intrinsic and extrinsic motivation can help to enhance performances. Feedback next. So feedback refers to how information is transmitted back to the athlete. Okay, so it can be intrinsic feedback first of all. So it refers to how an athlete can receive information from their own thoughts or feelings. An athlete can tell if a performance is successful by the way they feel after executing. So this can be brought in by the senses. So taking a hurler, for example, who strikes a sliotar, before they even look up, they know by the feel of the hurl in their hands what a good strike is compared to a bad strike, because they've practiced it so many times. They don't even have to look. They know that they've executed it quite well. Similar for a golfer there, or a javelin thrower. They know already from their senses. They know by the sound of the impact on the ball or the feel in their hands when they release a javelin that, yes, that's a good performance. And that's intrinsic feedback. They know themselves. Oftentimes as well, how you finish or your follow through, take a basketballer who's taking a shot, if they don't finish in a really balanced position and they're kind of stumbling over, well, more than likely they haven't executed the skill that well. Okay, so that could be intrinsic feedback. Extrinsic feedback, so here we have a swimmer talking to their coach. So this refers to how the thoughts of others are related to the athlete. So the coach here can give feedback in various different ways. It can be positive feedback, tell them what they did well. It can be negative feedback, which can maybe point out some areas for improvement or errors in their performance. But different athletes will respond to different types of feedbacks. Generally speaking, at the high level, elite athletes will need a bit of negative feedback because they want to know where they've went wrong, whereas beginner athletes will need to know a little bit more positive feedback, what they've done well. Okay, so concentration. So some strategies used to increase an athlete's concentration. And why is that important? Well, concentration can lead to more focus, more alertness in a game or event, and lead to a better performance. So use of routines would be very recommended there. Okay, so it's the same each time, each training session, each game, the same routine is executed so that the athlete doesn't have to worry or get a surprise on the day. Reread goals. So even if the goals are made at the start of the year and you're competing towards the end of the year, by rereading the goals, that can focus the athlete to increase their concentration. Have a concentration trigger also can help some people. So this could be a song that comes on maybe in their pre-performance routine. When they play that means their trigger. Other people have little cues like maybe a zip in their gear bag. When that goes open, then okay, now it's time to concentrate. Different triggers can work for different people. Okay, because it is very hard to concentrate the whole time, all the time, especially in some longer events. So maybe triggers can help some people. Positive self-talk. So you are a good athlete. You've done it before. You've performed in various different scenarios. You're a brilliant competitor. You always do your best. So that would be an example of positive self-talk that an athlete could use. Finally, visualize past performances. Why? Because past performances, as we know, have a huge impact on the self-efficacy of an athlete, according to Bandura. So visualization is a very good strategy to increase concentration. Confidence. So some strategies that are used by athletes to increase confidence before, during, and after performances, which is what you need to know in Leaving Cert PE, include visualization. So this would involve an athlete picturing themselves winning or through their own eyes, executing a correct performance, executing a correct skill, and just really kind of thinking about that. So even though if the athlete has never done it before, they feel like they have because they've visualized it. Positive self-talk, so we mentioned that there previously. So this can have a huge impact on the confidence of the performer. We have journaling, take note of positive parts of performance. So very often athletes will sit down after a performance and take down the positive parts that they've done, and that can have a huge impact on the confidence. And finally, mental rehearsal. So this is a little bit more vivid than visualization. So this would involve the athlete even involving their senses. So what would the smell of the arena be like in say, let's take swimming as an example. Could you smell the chlorine? Could you feel the wet pool deck under your feet? Like really kind of using the senses to mentally rehearse the performance and the pre-performance. And that can actually increase the confidence, because when it does happen in real life, it feels like you've done it before. So we have Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest boxers of all time, very famously said, I am the greatest, I am the greatest. I said that before I even knew I was. So he was huge on his positive self-talk. Okay, so looking at some strategies that can be used to enhance confidence, motivation, and concentration. So we've talked about visualization here. Okay, so this involves an athlete seeing themselves during a successful performance. Okay, and to go a little bit deeper here, so seeing themselves, instead of just maybe visualizing it from an audience perspective, very often an athlete will visualize through their own eyes. So what will they see as they're performing? So they'll close their eyes to picture themselves performing well. We have mental rehearsal. So a very common strategy used by athletes. This is more vivid than visualization, as it requires more senses. So what will it feel like? What will it smell like? What will it sound like? Athletes may even try to predict what smells and feelings they will experience. Positive self-talk. So it's another common strategy used by athletes. By having mantras like I am the best and I always perform to my best ability, athletes increase their own self-confidence. So some exam questions based on what we've done there. So explain 2 strategies that an athlete could use to enhance their mental preparedness during performance in a physical activity of your choice. Okay, so there you would name your physical activity, and you'd be talking about your 2 strategies that an athlete could use to enhance their mental preparedness. So you could talk about visualization, you could talk about positive self-talk, you could talk about mental rehearsal there. Okay, so explain again is our key action verb there. So you need to explain what the strategy does, how it's beneficial, and how does it enhance. So what does it actually do to the athlete to enhance their performance? Next we have Michael Jordan, one of the most famous basketball players of all time. So he's named the MVP in each of those 6 NBA final series. Examine, so this is quite a detailed, so this is nearly like an essay type answer. 2 psychological strategies that Jordan could have used pre-performance to ensure that he was mentally prepared for the psychological demands of an NBA final series. So again, very similar to the question up above, but you probably have to give a little bit more detail. So what are the pros, what are the cons of each strategy? Finally, with reference to a named physical activity, discuss 2 ways mental preparation can improve performance. Okay, so here you'd be talking about how does confidence, motivation, or concentration. Okay, excuse the bad handwriting there. So confidence, motivation, and concentration, how do they increase by certain mental preparation strategies? So our mental rehearsal, visualization, positive self-talk, how can they help our confidence, motivation, and concentration? Okay, so in summary, today we had a look at becoming aware of the principles of training. We acknowledged the importance of recovery and how to best recover from training. Then we had a look at strategies to avoid the symptoms of OTS, so overtraining syndrome. Demonstrate an understanding of periodization in the design of a training program. Discuss ways that confidence, anxiety, motivation, concentration, and feedback impact on practice and performance. Strategies to enhance confidence, motivation, and concentration. Discuss different types of feedback an athlete can use. Analyze strategies to improve mental preparedness for before, during, and after an activity. And developing a psychological preparation routine. Okay, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and the very best of luck with your studies in Leaving Cert PE.